StreamYard says it's showtime. This is the first Friday of the month. I'll have to see if I can sustain this in the summer, what my vacation is. Question and answer on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server. So if you would like to ask a question, you'll have to put it there, which means you can't be banned from the Bridges of Meaning Discord server. If you're banned, I guess you're just out of luck. So I'll drop the link into... I should do a little bit more setting up. This makes for terrible YouTube, me setting up another screen so I can monitor the chat room. But it is Friday and we have questions. We have a lot of questions, so I should try to be efficient in my answers. I tend to ramble, but any of you watching this should know that by now. Okay, I've found the appropriate window. I've got to mute that tab. And come on, YouTube, pull it up. Anyway, let's begin with the first question. You really need to start using a timer when you start streaming. I see other people do that, Jacob, but I've never done that. So I suppose it's probably a I suppose it's probably a setting there. So now I've got there, I can pin it. Okay. Pin. Jacob just keeps teaching me more and more StreamYard. So let's get to the questions. Al B says, I was listening to music that was popular with my friends and I in high school. Streetlight Man, Manifesto, Sum 41, Goldfinger, Less Than Jake, Rancid, Whole Wheat Bread. I don't know any of those bands. Sorry, I'm an old dude. And I had this thought. Given how the modern corporate government complex, aka the man, pushes wokeism into the masses, is Christianity the new punk rock? There was a comic on Joe Rogan who basically made that same point, that all the cool kids are doing the revolutionary thing, which is, if the revolutionary thing and right now is to be a trad. So to be an ortho bro or a Latin Mass Catholic or young, restless, and reformed, or maybe even Amish. So yeah, that's sort of the way that this reactionary culture goes. We go round and round and round, and whoever's on top, we kick against. Michigan Man Sam, can you make a contract with another person for them to love you? My immediate reaction is no, and as an accountant who also went to law school, I could give a more detailed answer than anyone would care to hear. Why? I'm struck, though, when I attend a wedding, that it doesn't stop people from trying. I would differentiate between covenant and contract. A covenant is, in some senses, a contract that you might not be able even to keep. And so it's a family is a covenant, not a contract. A contract is something more easily broken. A covenant is something that should be kept, but even when broken, might not be ended. Usually when you break a contract, it ends. Now, contract with another person for them to love you, a lot depends on whether you think about love as an action or a feeling. We are not in control of our feelings. We are somewhat in control of our actions. We have more control over our actions than our feelings. And so what we're actually promising to do in the covenant of marriage is to act in love towards that other person. The feelings will go up and down because that's what feelings do. Feelings are signals that we receive in this very dead reckoning sort of way that inform us about a whole lot of things. But feelings are very imprecise. We will often get a feeling about something. It doesn't mean I often tell people you shouldn't divinize your feelings. You also shouldn't just dismiss your feelings. Feelings are signals. You should listen to signals. Feelings shouldn't govern you. Feelings make terrible masters because they're simply signals. If you are governed by your feelings, you are governed by this this sum of internal, external, past, future, eschatology, all of that, which all goes into feelings. So you can't promise that you will feel a certain way about a person. What you do covenant with is that you will act in a particular way towards those people. And same with obligations. When you bring a child into this world, now there's a lot of hopefully biology that's working in your favor that biologists will talk about with respect to your children. And it's also true that if you act in love towards someone repeatedly, feelings of love may very well arise. But to love someone is a promise to act in a certain way. And that's what covenants are about. Let's see. Are heaven and utopia synonymous in the Christian tradition? By no means. Utopia, of course, was a novel written about no place. Utopia is no place. Heaven, heaven is the throne room of God, or in the pagan world, the gods. Heaven is up high. Heaven actually means a great deal of different things in different religious contexts. Heaven in the Christian realm is basically the throne of God. It's his kingdom. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It is what the temple in Jerusalem connects to, sort of like an embassy, the temple, the tabernacle. The reason that the fire of pillar goes up is that there's a connection between the tabernacle and the throne room of God, and all this imagery and symbolism is used all over the Bible. So they are very, very different places. Now, people want to talk about, let's say, a perfect place. The word perfect has interesting complexities as well. This is an enormous topic. But the question is, are they synonymous? And the quick answer is no, they are not. But there's a reason people connect them. All right, and on to Mark Lefebvre's really excellent question. What is the Christian answer to the meaning crisis? The Christian answer is that Christ is the meaning of life. And that sounds trite and like something you can put on a bumper sticker. But seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you. Matthew chapter 6. The Christian answer to the meaning crisis is you already have been given a cross that you are to drag uphill to the kingdom of God. You can go back to David Fuller's conversation with Jordan Peterson somewhere in 2018. That's where Peterson, after Fuller had interviewed me here at Living Stones, I commented that there's a fair amount of stoicism in Jordan. And the question was, okay, you're dragging that cross uphill. Does it go someplace? What separates sort of dragging a cross uphill from always pushing the rock uphill to have it fall down every night? I mean, I think sometimes people think that's what Christianity might mean, and it isn't, because you are carrying your cross uphill, and there is, in fact, a destination. And one way of talking about that destination, rather, you can say it's heaven at the top of the hill, and that's not wrong, but heaven and earth come together at the end of the book of Revelation. So that is the Christian answer to the meaning crisis. How does it differ from addressing the crisis of faith? Crisis of faith is a question as to whether that is a credible belief, whether people can sort of aspire to and attain that as something which motivates and moves their life. A crisis of faith, people usually walk away from that vision, and the result of that walking away will often be a meaning crisis. Now, when we talk in sentences like this that are fairly causative, because we're human beings and we're short-lived, we imagine a very short time frame. A lot of the time frame that we actually work in is multi-generational. When in the book of Exodus, I've been listening to the Exodus series again. The book of Exodus talks about the third and the fourth generation. That's kind of the time frame of that we're dealing with a lot of things. Really, many of these spirits live in centuries. We've been dealing with modernism for a number of centuries, and we might argue that peak modernity happened at the beginning of the 20th century, and it's been receding ever since. A big part of it died in the trenches of the First World War, that vision, but these visions continue to go on. I did a conversation this week with Richard Beck. Now, most of you probably don't know who Richard Beck is. Richard Beck has been writing a blog since 2007 called Experimental Theology. Richard Beck himself is not a theologian. And so I did a conversation with him this week, and I will publish it towards the beginning of next week. And this was one of the guys that I go out and I wanted to talk to, because I've actually been reading his blog since it started, and I've been enjoying his blog. And in many ways, my life, my trajectory, my spiritual journey, and his spiritual journey have been remarkably parallel. So in 2007, his blog gained some popularity. I probably found his blog through Rachel Held Evans. And that was sort of a progressive, we were both sort of, we were deconstructing before deconstructing was fashionable. I'll say it that way. 2007, though, I was sort of deconstructing and reconstructing under the tutelage of Tim Keller, because Keller was sort of my guru then. I was listening to a ton of Tim Keller. I didn't, of course, find Jordan Peterson until 2017, but I was working through all of those progressive issues. And then at some point, both Richard Beck and I took a turn. Richard Beck calls it post-progressive. I've been, Thomas Flight had a really good video that I've mentioned on my channel about metamodern, and that sent me into a dive of metamodern, and realized that there was some stuff on Rebel Wisdom about that, some other stuff that's this corner adjacent about metamodernity. We're really struggling to find language, sort of in a Peugeotian sense, to find language for, okay, post-modernity is clearly nihilistic, vacuous, empty of life, empty of promise, and is also deceitful. Yet there's a lot of instantiation of post-modernity that has been part of the process. And so people are looking for ways to get beyond modernity where the riches of modernity are not lost. And so, of course, the integral spiral dynamics people are out there, and they're, proposing theirs. Now the meta-modern conversation is around, there's sort of a grasping for language, and that grasping for language is in some sense a seeking the spirit, trying to understand. It's very interesting. A lot of these conversations talk about sensibilities. That's a word that comes up a lot. So it's a sensibility. It's, we don't even quite know how we're relating to the emerging spirit of the age. Not that spirit should be our master, but we have to understand that spirit. So remember, embody. I don't have any branding for you. I really have to learn better from Grim Grizz. So a crisis of faith is the loss of a plausibility structure. And again, Richard Beck talked about this really well. I very much recommend his blog, Experimental Theology. It's on Substack now. But a crisis of faith is a loss of plausibility, where in modernity, finally people imagined, I really loved it when at the conference, Vervaeke talked about inverting Neoplatonism. I thought that was a really good image. And part of the difficulty of a materialist, modernist conception is, well, that often provokes that crisis of faith, and the crisis of faith provokes a meaning crisis. And then what has been happening at the other end of the meaning crisis is sort of, once again, the reversal, where you begin to believe that the things unseen are in fact more determinative of our world than the things seen, that the things seen follow the things unseen, that all of the causality is in the unseen space, and that the seen space is how we see what has been moved. And it's like John 3, where Jesus talks about the leaves on the tree. I used that example in my adult Sunday school class. Sam gave my adult Sunday school class the highest recommendation. And I agree with Sam. I think my adult Sunday school class is in some ways some of the most important things I do, because it's all of this thinky talky stuff that I do on my channel otherwise, using these fancy terms, that most normal people wouldn't understand. My adult Sunday school classes, where I actually take a lot of these things, try to apply it even to my study of the book of Romans, and give it to my people at church. So, well, there's a third part of the question. How do both of these manifest in women versus men? Oh gosh. I don't think they're cleanly aligned, women versus men, because men and women are different. They interact with them in different ways. I think some of that is biological. But men and women interact with it. There's a reason New Atheism was mostly, now again, if you listen to Peterson, men and women are mostly the same, but the ways that we differ are significant, and they bear out in behavior. And so most of the people that really sort of bit hard on New Atheism, a majority of the New Atheists were men. I tended to see, so basically when you had the crisis of faith, when the plausibility structure, because of the continued push of modernity and the inversion of Neoplatonism, when the plausibility structure hit, generally speaking, men went to atheism and women went to yoga. I'll say it that way. Women have, I think, in some ways, a harder time disembodying, especially if they have children. Bearing a child is a very embodying thing. There's no question about it. Men, ironically, can live in their heads in a certain way that many women can't afford to do. That doesn't mean that women can't do it. Many women do. But again, it's sort of like these patterns of dispersion that Peterson notes about. Agreeableness. Women are higher in agreeableness than men. The most disagreeable people wind up usually in trouble or in prison. That's why there are more men in prison. So when you look at massive populations, the small differences in temperament begin to have large consequences. So, and I think that's part of the reason why, generally speaking, women are a little better embodied than men. And that's why I said when the crisis of faith hits, men went to atheism and women went to yoga. Now, in terms of the meaning crisis, I also had a piece in my talk with Richard Beck about sort of why Buddhism has sort of run aground, and why there's, just like there's sort of post-Christian, there's post-Buddhist. And I think it has to do, again, with the incarnate world. So you can wait for that conversation. It was a great conversation. I also had a very good conversation with Spencer Clavin, and that's coming out maybe Saturday. As you've seen, those of you who've been looking at the channel, I put out a whole bunch of little videos, including the little story about the clothing, the heap of clothing in the parking lot. That was fun. So that's what I have to say about men and women. Whew, talking a mile a minute. Where's my water bottle? Oh. See, I'm trying to get through these things and not have the first question take the first half hour. All right, on to the next. RLE. The word pattern, from the Latin pater, meaning father. That's interesting. If you accept the ontology of form and matter, you have to accept the entire sexual ontology that is implied. Pattern, heaven is father, as in God the Father, and matter, earth, is the mother. penetration by the father is giving form, receiving by woman is accepting and homing of form. This seems to remain unspoken in this corner. What do you make of it, Pastor? I think symbolically that seems coherent. I wouldn't have any argument with it. So this week in my sermon prep, and my sermon is very undone. My sermon's a mess, and it's Friday. That doesn't bode well for Sunday. It doesn't bode well for the rough draft. Might not be a rough draft this week if I can't get my act together. We live in a very reactive age. And part of what is dominating the man-woman conversation is a reactivity. A lot of women are out there saying, the last thing I want to be is controlled by a man. All right, then don't be. And there's a lot of traditionalists out there saying, we ought to get back to the old days when men said and women did. I'm not sure that was ever the case. Now, it's certainly the case that in certain spheres, men tended to dominate historically. And there's good things about that, and there's bad things about that. And I think I run through these kind of arguments in my church life all the time because the Christian Reformed Church sort of put itself right on the cusp of the egalitarian complementarian thing. A couple of years ago, when one of the churches in our classis, that's our regional area, was leaving the denomination, and part of the reason that they gave for leaving the denomination was the fact that the Christian Reformed Church was allowing women to serve in all ecclesiastical offices. One of their big grounds for leaving was, in fact, that reality. And so they had a congregational meeting, and myself, as a church visitor, was tasked by the classis to go and visit that church and talk to them about their reasons for leaving and try to talk them out of it, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a major congregational meeting. And in that congregation meeting, there were very loud voices calling that this church had to leave the denomination because women were allowed to serve in all ecclesiastical offices. And the loudest, most vocal voices for that case were from women in that congregation. And there's just a host of nested ironies in that because as late as let's say the mid-20th century, women weren't allowed to vote in a congregational meeting in the Christian Reformed Church. That was the practice in the church. But I think women, and it'd be very interesting to hear. It's very interesting to hear women argue against, I don't believe women should have a voice in any of this, says the woman. It's like, not quite sure what to do with that. That's a performative contradiction. So, okay. I listened this morning to a conversation between James White and Doug Wilson about Christendom 2.0. Some people recommended that to me. I did listen to some of the James O'Keefe YouTube and Tim in real life. A number of you had sent that one to me. There were some interesting things in that with respect to sort of this, these new forms of distributed, I'm going to call it distributed journalism. Okay. It's only semi-distributed though, because it really only works if you do in fact have sort of a collection point, which is O'Keefe himself. But anyway, back to the Doug Wilson, James White conversation about Christendom 2.0, which I found very interesting, actually. All of this relies on our ability to turn the many into one. What do I mean by that? Are things getting better or worse? What things? Is the universe, that's sort of a globalizing conceptualization, and then you're going to put a binary evaluation on that globalized conceptualization. It strikes me that this is something that we number one, do instinctively. Number two, have to do. Number three, don't really have any right to do because and because we it's simply not within our capacity to do so in a certainly not in a perfect way. It it's just an enormous thing. It's like saying America, bad or good. And what's ironic about a lot of a lot of voices that are you know calling for America has lost its way. America is the great shining light of the world. It's like, well, wait a minute, have they lost their way or the light great shining? Well, they're both. Oh, okay. Well, how are they both? And are they still both? The devil's in the details. So, but my point is that we make these we make these global evaluations when, of course, we can't really do the math. I mean, let's say the world is terrible. Is the world terrible because I'm depressed today? Or am I depressed today because the world is terrible? And I'm an millennial. You get into eschatology. So in some ways, millennials are kind of like fence sitters because the world is always terrible and the world is always beautiful. And both those things are true at the same time. And a lot depends on where you are in the world. But we have to sort of globalize and make these universalizing statements, and we have to have evaluations and we have to choose. So, but once you're kind of hung up on that, where do you go? So if you have just a massive symbolic frame of reference, such as, Father Heaven, Mother Earth, penetrating, just ask Butler how well that did for him on Twitter. I thought I should probably have him on the channel. That would be fun. Hear how he got disinvited from the Gospel Coalition. And because he made an argument. When I read that argument, I thought, yeah, we wouldn't be all offended if a church father said something like that, but don't let Josh Butler say it now. It's just funny. People are so funny. So do we talk about I hear behind the question, and correct me if I'm wrong, do we not talk about enough about, let's say, women should be seen and not heard? There's often a conversation in this corner about the predominance of men. And now no woman is excluded from this formally in any way. In fact, women are often invited into it. And what is very interesting is that even though women are maybe 1/20th or 1/10th, I mean, 95% of the logged in viewers of my YouTube channel are men. Now, YouTube is overwhelmingly male, but you would think that 1/20th of a population, would be insignificant, but 1/20th of the population in this little corner, which are women, certainly seem to punch above their weight class. When I was much more active on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, those, a small group of women drew a lot of attention and held a lot of authority and had a lot of clout and impact and continue to do so. There are, so yeah, the all of the dissonance and controversy and angst and attention that we give to the male-female difference, I don't think is going to go away, because points of interest like that are often perennial points of interest because the differences are profound, inscrutable, and probably beyond our ability to easily summarize. In other words, as long as this world turns, men and women are going to be trying to figure each other out. And it happens in every marriage. It happens in every family, happens in every church, happens in every space that men and women are together. And sometimes it's even more easily seen and found in spaces where, in sex segregated spaces where men and women are by themselves. So it's an American thing. It's an American thing. It's an amazing thing. Okay, can I give a quick update on the anthology project? Well, let me see. Let me see what I can do. What I'm going to do, Valerie, is I am going to drop the oh, why does it do that? I'm going to drop the link. I see that you're in the voice chat room, Valerie. Oops, no. Paste. Copy and pasting. Copy. It says it's copied. Good. No, we're not trying to do that. Trying to do this. There we go. So Valerie, there's a link to this to StreamYard in the short questions for PVK. If you want to, she says, "Oh, now I'm going to go on. You can keep your camera off. I'll let you in, Valerie. I'll let you in. If two Valeries show up, it'll be interesting because will there be a troll? So if you want to keep your camera off and just come in with your voice, you can do that. And I'll bring you in and you can give me an update on the anthology. So I will go on until I see you come into the room, and then we will go from there. Here's the project link. Let's copy link. Oh, there she is. Paste. Hey, Valerie.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Let me pause the live stream there. There we go. Okay, cool. Thank you very much for letting me come on.
Oh, of course, of course. I'll leave the technical things aside. Tell us about the anthology project.
We submitted all our pieces, and it's actually very fun and encouraging. And I just had my first feedback session last night with the beta readers, and I got a lot of good feedback, and I have a lot of editing to do, but it was good. And we have a number of beta readers who are reading the different projects. We're moving forward in the marketing stage. We do have an artist from the last time I talked to you, who's going to help us with the illustrations inside the book. She might be able to help us with the book cover, but if we can find somebody else to help with the book cover, that would be awesome. We also are in need of donations for the to help make books and some costs for the books. So if anybody out there wants to help support the book, to support Paul's ministry, you can follow the link valerieflynn.com and click on community, and there's a bunch of information, including the GoFundMe information link on the webpage. So thank you very much, Paul.
Well, thank you, Valerie. This is an exciting project. I'm going to see if I can put this link in the crawl. Let's see. I remember there was back in the day, there was a crawl because that's how Jacob fired me. It was in the crawl. Scroll across the bottom. There we go. Let's see if it works. Show. Hey, there it is.
Nice.
Valerie with an IE Flynn with 2 Ns.com/community. And that will put people in touch with the anthology project. I know you guys have been working on this a long time, and it's exciting. So cool.
We're thinking we might publish by the end of this year or the beginning of next.
Okay.
And it'll be going out to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the others.
Wow.
So we're we have big plans. It's a little book, though most people complain about anthologies being long. Ours is going to be short, and hopefully some of the others have very interesting stories. I'm like, this is cool. I won't spoil it.
All
It's
right.
really
All
neat.
right. Very good. Looking forward to this. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. So I'll leave that crawl going for a while. Yeah, Matt, I haven't forgotten your project. Matt wants to interview me on my channel, which is fun because I like being interviewed. Because I'll leave my personal flaws up to you all to discover. Michael Satori asks, is there a connection between the secessionist teaching of the Reformation and the rationalist materialism that came from the Enlightenment and modernity? There absolutely is, Michael. There absolutely is. So part of what happened in the Protestant Reformation was the Reformation looked at a lot of what had sort of developed around the church as superstition. And so for many centuries, Protestants were sort of anti-supernatural. And you've heard me talk about the framing of those two words. I don't like the word supernatural. I think once you start using that language, you already have, if you have a natural, supernatural, if you use that language, you already have a dualism. And I think a big part of the project, the implicit project of this little corner, has been dualisms are just waiting to be unified, and unities are just waiting to be differentiated. It's kind of a natural perennial tension throughout history. And so a lot of what the Protestant reformers believed was that there was just a lot of BS that had happened in the church. And again, in many ways, if I use the Leslie Newbegin language of plausibility structures, the Protestant Reformation is the result of a collapse of some plausibility structures in certain areas of Europe. Now, if you read something like Reformations, Carlos Erie's book about the Reformations, Christendom in Europe was a very large place, and it's very interesting the places in which the plausibility structures collapsed and the places and the ways in which it didn't, but also sort of did. So Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Hungary, England, Scotland, they all got the Protestant Reformation. France got the French Revolution. Spain had their own issues. In other words, the Protestant Reformation is just one way in which the tensions that had been building up in the system were made manifest. Now, a lot of people would say, well, I much prefer the Protestant Reformation to the French Revolution, and rightly so, because in many ways, the Protestant Reformation founds then the English separatists that flee to the New World and start their own thing, which eventually shapes America. And that's why the American Revolution is different from the French Revolution. But in many ways, the forces within the culture that were unleashed in some ways through the Protestant Reformation and in other ways through the French Revolution, and in other ways in Italy through some of the things that were going on in Italy. I mean, this history is tremendously complex. So for many centuries, Protestants were sort of debunkers, rationalists, because remember, even Luther's project was in some sense a rationalistic effort, in that Luther believed that if you get better texts if you get back to as close as you can back to the original New Testament plus reason, everyone will agree. Luther's great disappointment is that that didn't work. But that was posed against, let's say, the church that said, here, the church, we have the institution, the tradition, and the institution and tradition will bring us forward. Well, you saw what happened in the French Revolution. So what is going on in there is very much questions about institutions and traditions. And so here in the early part of the 21st century, where we have this continued collapse of faith in institutions, whether they be governmental or ecclesiastical, that's still kind of a part of the Protestant Reformation and the revolutions that would roil Europe on throughout the modern period. Now, and for that reason, I very much understand a lot of people seeking shelter in Orthodoxy, but it's also the case that a lot of this was also manifest in the early part of the 20th century in the Protestant world in Pentecostalism. Of course, the Catholics had their Catholic Catholicism. So there's a relationship between those responses. So with Pentecostals, they just basically, it's a culture shift again. And Pentecostals very quickly re-enchant the world. Orthodoxy is in many ways, Jonathan Peugeot's work is a re-enchantment. And I know there's a bunch of you in the back saying there's no such thing as re-enchantment. Enchantment never went away. True, but it's about attention, and it's about plausibility structures, and it's about believability. So the secessionists, in that sense, were deeply consistent with the spirit of the Protestant Reformation. They just took it further, because basically what the Protestant Reformation wanted to do was say, we believe in the enchantment between the covers of the New Testament. So Jesus' miracles are true, Muhammad's miracles are false. And Jesus' miracles are true. If there's a miracle outside the New Testament, it doesn't exist. Pentecostals said, no, miracles are all over the place. And, you had a variety of fundamentally prophetic traditions. And, when Paul came up, I haven't posted that on my channel. It'll be coming fairly soon. When Paul came up and asked me about basically apostolic succession, he had a point with respect to, let's say, the emergence of the prophetic. Islam is by virtue of there's one, Allah is one God and Muhammad is his prophet. Well, there you go. It's a prophetic movement. Mormonism, the Latter-day Saints Church, is a prophetic movement. Pentecostalism in late 20th century, you had this whole new language about the reemergence of the office of apostle. And you had the Kansas City, you had the Kansas City prophets. And I've got a book up there about the Kansas City prophets. Fascinating thing. You had this outbreak in the Protestant Reformation too, but Munster sort of was a pill of sobriety through Europe that, well, unfettered prophetism can lead to a lot of chaos. So the Catholics and the Protestants couldn't agree on much, except that Anabaptism was a field, was a bit too far. And actually, so again, listening to that James White, Douglas Wilson conversation about Christendom 2.0, Anabaptism disciplined itself and basically joined, for the most part, the group of well-behaving Protestants in Europe. Most Baptists, people who are, let's say, go to a Baptist church, they're not Anabaptists. The Anabaptist was, the radical Reformation. They come later, often part of the Reformed camp. So that's why there's a tight bond between certain Baptists and certain Reformed. You have Reformed Baptist, yada, 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 all that stuff. So yeah, secessionism is very consistent with the Protestant Reformation. I think it's wrong. But yeah, it's very much a part of it. Curiosity gun. PVK, what would your opinion be of someone having an amateur MMA fight before their baptism in the Orthodox Church? I would say you should talk to your priest. as a product, if someone was having an amateur MMA fight before their baptism in the Christian Reformed Church, I wouldn't have a problem with it necessarily. I'd talk to the person about it, but I wouldn't have a problem with it. That's what I'm planning on specifically, but just in general, what do you think of willingly putting your life in semi-dangerous place and then committing to Christianity afterwards? I don't know that the problem is so much the danger you're doing to yourself, but the fact that you're going to win the fight by pummeling someone else. I think that's actually spiritually more problematic in some ways. I don't think it's illegitimate. I don't think it's illegitimate, but if you're raising those kinds of questions, I don't think it's people who plow highways put their life in danger. Police officers put their life in danger. Soldiers put their lives in danger. Usually the bigger danger is the harm you do to others. If you look at what Peterson talks about PTSD, that it's not necessarily the hazard that people really have trouble getting their minds around. It's the violence that their own hands do that has to be sort of worked through in terms of the integrity of the Christian spirit. So those are my thoughts. Did they call you Pastor Polo in the Dominican Republic? No, they did not. They called me Pablo. And I was the missionary. So in the DR, there were missionaries and there were pastors. Oh, there was a hierarchy. As much as we Protestant missionaries tried to undo our own hierarchy, there were plenty of performative contradictions involved. And the local churches were just not having it. When I would visit a church, they would put me on a chair right up in front, and I'd say, "No, I want to sit with the people." And they're like, "You're out of your mind. Get where you belong up there on the stage. You're a missionary. Act like it." So, yeah, that was another life. How can we acknowledge the layers of reality, for example, the gods, without falling into idolatry? What is the Old Testament view on this? Oh, there's so much subtlety in that conversation. Because part of what's so difficult about the Old Testament on this is that when we arrive at the New Testament and when we look at the classical period, we know so much about it. We have the Greek myths. We know a lot about Rome and Greece. A dirty little secret about history is that history is captivated by cultures that have the spoken word and the written word. There's so little history written about places like Africa and Asia that did not have writing because we just don't know so much. You can look at archaeology, even with, let's say, the Maya or some of these these early American civilizations, until you sort of crack the written code, it's hard to know what they were thinking. And even after you crack the written code, it's still hard to know what they were thinking. And I dealt with this to a degree in the video that I put out earlier this week when, Tom Holland speaks about this about as eloquently as anyone, where, okay, so we have all the words of the Greeks and Romans, but that doesn't mean from the inside for them, it felt like we can sort of imagine what it would feel like for us, because history is a foreign country. They do things differently. So and again, Michael Heiser, who just recently passed away, did a lot to sort of try to bring some of this out into the American evangelical community. So what was clear is that a lot of contemporary English translations, not so much in the King James because of the way that they translated, but in a lot of contemporary English translations, the strangeness of the Hebraic conceptualization of the spiritual powers in the cosmos was sort of tamped down. This is the problem of the excluded middle that missionaries talked about a lot in the 20th century, that Protestant missionaries basically had a two-tier universe where you had God in heaven and people below. It's very much a product of the Protestant Reformation, going back to my answer to Michael's question. Let's have a window like this. So, for example, at the beginning of the book of Job, who is the accuser? What is this heavenly court? How do we conceptualize of the Lord? And when the Hebrews didn't seem to have sort of the exploration of the rich diversity of other spiritual powers. And so then when we bump into that in the New Testament, we begin with Jesus, especially in the Gospel of Mark, just exercising right and left. And, well, did Elijah exercise? Did Elisha exercise? We don't find Elijah and Elisha bumping into demon-possessed people in ancient Israel. And so part of what that resulted in was, well, demons aren't real. And then getting into the question of what on earth do we mean by that word? And then suddenly in the New Testament, we do. And so then you can read sort of, some of the apocryphal, some of the intertestamental Jewish writings and see, oh, there's a development of conversation with respect to these things. But we have sort of in the modern period arrived at a capacity to account for a developmental process, and we usually use a secularish worldview to sort of process that developmental process, but we all need to maintain a worldview. And so, again, Protestants tended to have sort of a two-tier worldview. There's God, there's angels, there's demons, but there's, it's just basically me and God, me and Jesus. And then, of course, Pentecostals come along and you can read Frank Peretti, This Present Darkness, and those kinds of books. And suddenly there's spiritual warfare and there's demonic possession and there's demonic oppression and there's casting out the spirit of pornography or smoking or the Jezebel spirit or whoosh. So in many ways, we're not necessarily talking about idolatry, because idolatry, while not disconnected from this, again, the main answer in the Old Testament about the gods of the nations and their statues these are gods of, as Tom Holland loves to say in his British way, gods of stock and stone, gods of wood and stone. And you find the Hebrew prophets just mocking their neighbors. They make their god, they stand it up. And of course, you have in the story of the Philistines and Dagon, his statue is falling down and his hands and his feet are all of this stuff. And so, I've liked Ezekiel Kaufman's work on this, because Kaufman nicely shows, hey, wait a minute, something's going on here that we haven't paid enough attention to. And the Hebrew cosmology was rich with actors, and sort of the appropriation that Western Protestantism had of it was a little flat. So that's sort of being corrected. And now, of course, we've got the Orthodox in our midst who in some ways are better connected with, the late antiquity writings and into early modernity of church fathers on these matters. So it's really complex, but idolatry is a different thing. I remember visiting an Orthodox Presbyterian church in Southern California and having a conversation with an elder there. And he was talking about the Vietnamese population in the neighborhood. And he was saying how, yeah, a lot of those Vietnamese are Catholic because they like worshiping statues. And I thought, I can see why you're saying that, knowing the history of the Protestant Reformation, but do you think the fact that Vietnam was a French colony might have something to do with the Catholicism of the Vietnamese? Idolatry, you don't need a statue to have questions about idolatry, and which was part of the point of John Calvin and the Protestant Reformation. You can make idols out of words. You can make idols out of concepts. You can make idols out of people. Calvin says the human mind is a perpetual idol factory. And I think part of the reason we do that is because we do need instantiations. And idolatry is when the instantiation, in a sense, replaces or hinders the origin of that instantiation, which is why the command, "You shall not make a graven image," is one of the most, again, I sound like Dennis Prager on the Exodus series. It's just such a bolt from the blue in the ancient world that it has to come from God, because it's just the most brilliant overthrowing idea you can imagine in its time period, that God is not another thing in the world. And so, things occur to me slowly. I'm not that bright. And so when you listen to John Vervaeke talk about no thingness, and I know some people sort of bristle, why don't you just say God? Well, part of John's point in that isn't far from Jonathan Peugeot's point, and it isn't far from Bishop Barron, and isn't far from classical Christianity, and it isn't far from Ezekiel Kaufman, where the God of the Hebrews is not just another thing, but the God of the Hebrews does come to us in the universe as a person. And I'm not going to go into the Trinity right now, but one of the really interesting things over the last few years in terms of this little corner and getting to know Jonathan Peugeot, my second conversation with him, I still at that point wasn't understanding a lot of what Jonathan was doing. And because when I'd listened to him talk about spirits and gods, it was like, and now it's not quite so alien to me. So yeah, it's a big deal, Jonathan W. It's a good question. I was listening to music that was popular. Didn't I read this? That's a repeat of the question. I remember Paul remarking on how we cannot undo the Protestant Reformation, and that for many people, their entry into the steep slope religion is tinged with its failure. I've been going strong on the Hallow app for my prayer routines. Can you wax poetic about the modernizing of conventional position and adoption of technologies? Great, Mad Sheep. Awesome. I've recently found myself comparing it to the Roman infrastructure that enables the church to grow. Yeah, and that's, again, to go all the way back to Peugeot and his garments of skin. Thank you, CW. The human heart, not the mind. CW, very sharp guy, always listening, able to correct. Yeah, Genesis does differentiate. That's right. I find a doubt for every time someone says hypostasis. Some of you won't get that joke, but indeed, indeed. Oh, where was I? Oh, yeah. There's no going back. You know, if there's a community really trying to go back, it's the Amish, but they're really only trying to go back a few centuries. And at some point, we're gonna have to bring this conversation out onto YouTube. There's a lot of people sort of sheepish about it right now, but in some ways, the biggest event of the Chino conference was the tour of St. Andrews. Oh my, are there a lot of strong opinions that people are reluctant to share? Oh, my only disappointment in the conference was that I couldn't tour that church with Grim Grizz because he had already left. Fascinating, 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 fascinating. So we're standing outside before we actually enter St. Andrews, and I'm standing next to Scott, Catherine's brother. Scott's a fun guy. Scott's a very interesting guy. I really like Scott. He's a piece of work, but he and I both know Protestant megachurches, and listening to Father Josiah talk, it's like there's surely an Orthodox thing here, but there's sort of a Southern California megachurch vibe here. And remember, Southern California culture and megachurch culture are kind of like this. Willow Creek happened in Chicago, but Saddleback happened in not very far from St. Andrews. And if you're sensitive to these spirits, you can sense them. And oh gosh, that's, and I think part of the reason people are reticent to say what they think, even in this little corner, which has sort of prized having a brave space and not a safe space, is we don't want to offend or needlessly. And so you got to be careful about how to say hard things. But that for me was just fascinating, and the responses to it from different camps. And none of it, I'm not in any way being critical. I'm not condemning or judging or any of that. I'm just looking at all of this and saying, wow, this is so fascinating. And again, my position has been, I'm with Peugeot, go to church. And if your way back to Christ brings you to Orthodoxy, God bless you. Go to that Orthodox church. And I don't mean one of the good things about the Orthodox church is they make you go. Christian Reformed Church used to be that way. But the Orthodox Church are serious. I mean, if you want to join, you're going to take it seriously and they're going to hold you to it. And I praise God for that. And that is wonderful. So I am in no way critical of blessing the Orthodox Church with North Americans. I say go to it, because the Orthodox Church is a church of Jesus Christ. Absolutely. And to visit a church. I mean, I personally, what I would love to do is just have my own personal Peugeot and walk into a place like that and just have it be me and Jonathan, and have Jonathan just start talking about what all the things mean. And, of course, John has deep evangelical roots. And so John knows sort of the evangelical world. So he's a good translator. He can kind of speak both languages. And so when I walking into an Orthodox church and listening to Jonathan Peugeot explain it to me, it's like, oh, wow, yeah, that's good. I really like that. I like that. I like that. Does that mean I'm going to exchange my blue shirt for an Orthodox robe? No. But I can really see I can really see how God is blessing us through the Orthodox Church. I'll say it that way. And I praise God for the presence and the flourishing of Orthodoxy in America. I think they are going to I wouldn't say disappointing. My take was fascinating, just fascinating. I just was fascinated by it. Um, and talking to a lovely woman that I was talking to at the conference, as she goes to his church, and she's saying, "We've got all these people coming in. It's just so exciting." I just thought, this just so reminds me of talking to evangelicals in their successful mega churches, that those spirits, just sort of can't be taken away. So, yeah. Boy, that was fascinating. I shared, I had a chance to talk with Jonathan Sunday night at the hotel about some of my thoughts about it. And so, because he was really curious what I thought. So I shared candidly, and maybe at some point I'll share more candidly on the channel, but you get the gist of it from what I just said. Cause I'm fascinated by it. And again, if someone comes to me and says, "Pastor, I want to be a Christian, I'm going to the Orthodox Church," I would say, go, join, get chrismated, get baptized. I'm going to be careful with the baptism thing. Were you baptized before? I'm not really down with the rebaptism. I know some Orthodox do, some don't. I'm trying to understand the Orthodox because it's a whole new world. But yeah, I'm just fascinated by it. And you're right. Like with an app, and that's silly. That Hallow app is what keeps bringing me back. That Hallow ad is what keeps bringing me back to the daily. Listen to Jordan Peterson on the Daily Wire, because I don't have to deal with the paid promotions in the middle of YouTube. We're already paid for YouTube Premium. I don't want to listen to the ads, even if it's an ad for Exodus 90 or the Hallow app, which is helping people read their Bible through their smartphone. Yeah, there's no going back. There's no going back, baby. But God is still large and in charge, and he is still on the throne, and his kingdom come, his will be done. Just like I have no problem reading your Bible in a book form instead of on scrolls. Yeah, it's amazing. And where this is going to go in Orthodoxy, I think, is going to continue to be fascinating. So God bless the Orthodox Church. God bless the Catholic Church. God bless the Protestant churches. I'm very much a mere Christianity guy. So if the feminine gives body was Mary Magdalene or Mary who anointed Jesus' body for burial, necessary for Christ's resurrection. Necessary? I can't use a word like necessary, because you would be asking me to make a declaration of what I just simply don't know. Obviously his birth was necessary for his resurrection. His anointing for burial, I don't know. Maybe a little more context and reasoning on my part. If the Virgin Mary was necessary for God to come in the flesh, was the repentant, mournful spirit of Mary, the anointing of Christ's body, and the spices brought to his tomb necessary for his resurrection? Again, I mean, part of this is the imagination of the modern and the scientistic, which is to say, well, if Mary hadn't made it to the tomb, Jesus would still be in there. And it almost makes it sound mechanistic. And I don't think that's where we want to go. So God knows. And it was God's plan. I mean, so I'm a Calvinist, which means that God gets what he wants, and sometimes in strange ways. And so she was foreordained to anoint him. So It's simply part of the story. And I really appreciate you asking the question in the way that you did, because I had never thought of that. And that's, again, part of this blindness of one tradition vis-a-vis the other. How would you relate this to theosis? I wouldn't have connected it to theosis necessarily. Again, back to Orthodoxy. I mean, the richness of it is the richness of symbolism. So I was listening again to this James White conversation with Doug Wilson about Christendom 2.0, and James White is going on and on again about how he visited Luther's church and how he preached in the pulpit and how he visited the cell of this Baptist that was persecuted. And Richard Rowland is in my consciousness Congress, like, and you Protestants don't have holy places and icons? Yep. Gotta concede. So, the Orthodox are bringing to life a rich symbolic tradition that is clearly blessing Protestants. So when I did my talk with Kevin Adams, he's got an icon in his office. I do my talk with, a woman pastor friend of mine and colleague, a woman that I taught theology to and mentored all the way into the ministry. She's got an icon in her office. And I think, my grandfather, hearing that a Christian Reformed minister has an icon in their church office, would have thought the end was nigh. But yet here we are. So I don't have an icon in my office. I've got that. I think that's really cool. As a gift from the art group to me. Working through all this stuff, And Richard Rowland might say, oh, Paul, if I came into your office, I'd see a whole bunch of icons that you have. Just Protestant icons. Ulysses. Oh, good luck with your fight. My question, Paul, I was born in a high-control Christian fundamentalist cult that practiced hard shunning of their former members. This group excommunicates and shuns members, even family, for offenses most people would consider minor. Smoking cigarettes, celebrating Christmas, questioning doctrine. This cult had a deeply traumatic effect on my family. My brother tried to kill himself twice because of the shunning. Oh, I am so sorry. For my part now, I find a lot of difficulty doing religious exploration without alarm bells going off. You and Vervaeke. I mean, I read the comments on my videos, and I know that John continues to elicit a lot of reaction. In the community for a whole variety of reasons. But should look at the comments. The icon of the Bridges of Meaning, Chad in a Lucha Libre mask. Oh, true. Where was I? Trauma is real. It takes a lot to get over trauma. Read the story of Moses. Moses probably had spent 40 years in the desert before God calls him with the burning bush, getting over his trauma from Egypt. For my part now, I find a lot of difficulty in doing religious exploration without alarm bells going off. Almost everything reminds me of my experiences growing up in this cult. Recently, I've been experimenting with Latin Mass and reading catechism, but it seems every baby step I take is hurting my heart more. I'm torn between wanting to heal my relationship to the religion of my ancestors, Catholicism, and staying away from it all because it's just too much. Frankly, I can't expect anyone at church or people in general, including the therapist, to really get what I'm dealing with. As it is fringe and bizarre, it's not that fringe. There's a lot of people with religious trauma. Any idea how to proceed safely? Well, I don't know about safely. Bravely. Is it again, look at John Vervaeke's journey. This is a big part of his journey. So again, my conversation with Richard Beck, I think you'll find helpful, because Richard Beck comes out of a very fundamentalist group, not as cultish as yours. I think you should be gentle with yourself. And I think you need to have trusted friends around you to travel with. Because what's beneath a lot of trauma, and the therapists among us can probably either correct me or validate me, is trust has been violated. A deep trust has been violated. And how can that trust be regained? It's not easy. So I think you need to have people around you that are deeply trustworthy for you to journey with, for you to check in with. And just the fact that there are 12 little praying hands under this in the Discord server says to me, number one, you're certainly not alone. And number two, there are many people that are in some ways there with you. So my prayers are for you. And I'd say find people around you personally that you can trust and walk with them. There are many like you. I bump into it fairly often. Have you ever considered yourself the new C.S. Lewis? No, I'm not that smart. I'm not that well read. I'm not that well educated. I haven't written any books. C.S. Lewis was a weird dude in a lot of ways. We're all unique individuals. I hope that I am helping some people find C.S. Lewis, because I think he's been a tremendous witness for Christ in this world. But remember, there's a lot of my favorite Lewis biography is Alan Jacobs' The Narnian. I love that biography. It was really, really moving. But it's just little old me, folks. Just little old me. As you have the ability to join and deconstruct our current ideas, logical landscape, I do it to a degree, but I'm much more. When I look at my role, it's the alcoholic says I'm more like Mr. Rogers. I put on my cardigan, put on my shoes. Won't you be? Please, won't you be my neighbor? Your sweater is on point. Oh, yes. My gifts aren't Lewis's gifts. Lewis's gifts aren't my gifts. But we have the same goal, which is both Lewis and I believe that Christ is the source of life. And all instantiations in this age fall short. Lewis had huge blind sides. If you saw my sins the way I see my sins, you might unsubscribe. But here we are. I only got me to give. So yeah. Yeah. I want people to know life and life abundant. So what myth would you say you are living through? Hmm. I don't know that I so much think about it as a myth. I just have this weird gift of attracting the strange. I was listening to I was thinking about the Chino conference, and so there are sort of subsets, there are corners of the corner. And so generally speaking, the Viveki corner tends to be more of the spiritual but not religious, new agey, deconstructed Christian. That tends to be more the Viveki, really intellectual, open people in the Viveki corner. The Peugeot corner has a high concentration of people who are new to Orthodoxy and excited about it and doing that. I look around at my corner. My corner's just strange. I love it. I love the strange. And that's why of the channels, I check Grim Grizz and Chad the Alcoholic every day. I want to see if they put new stuff out. Because I just love it. I'm a fringe character, but I'm sort of a fringe bridge, I think. And that's kind of my role. I'm the king of the island of misfit toys, I suppose. So yeah, and Lance, Lance is right there with me. BOM is a strange hot mess. It is glorious. I agree. It's there's so much good stuff. So much good stuff. And I think in these days when we need good clowns. We're living in clown world. We need some good clowns. And to the degree that, I can give a little bit of visibility to some of the good clowns, I'm going to do it. Fringe Bridge is good. Yeah. Sandy. There was a point in one of the Quest for a Spiritual Home. Wow. We got a 5-letter acronym, Q for Ash. That's good. Talks in Chino, where the speaker, Vervaeke, said, repent. I believe in looking at ways to that we reorient. I have a 2-part question on what had me thinking about this. Pent has different roots and context depending on which language we ascribe it to. We do a disservice to comments of speakers and not delving deeper into creative curiosity. In other words, looking only for close familiar perspectives. Pent as enclose, I'll put this in bigger things so you can forgive my poor reading. Pent as enclosure reminds me of the halakhic man, Soloveitchik, speaking of ways God contracts himself, his grandeur, to make space for creation. Yeah. To make space for man's participation in his creation, to create with. Can you speak to this concept, and if how, to engage with the Christian mind? Is this in any way represented in Christian thought? Do we relate our or God's action here to Vervaeke's radicals and centering? Sandy, I'm not sure I grasped your question. So pent as enclosure, contracts himself, making smaller. Calvin would say condescends. I didn't see anything that sounds alien to Christianity. And I think, I don't know quite what to do with your question, Sandy. I'm sorry. I can't quite get my head around it. Sharky JML, John Vervaeke warned end-timer Christians, Jesus is coming, so no worries, mate, to be mindful of past Kairos events where God was silent. Your response to that was one of, you responded to that in one of your videos with define silent. Can you expand on that? my God, why have you forsaken me? Was the Father silent when Jesus was on Golgotha? I think John is responding to sort of a facile Pollyannish false faith when Christians say things like climate change isn't a thing because God wouldn't allow the destruction of the earth. And I think, well, then there was the flood. Then there was the Second World War. There was the Black Death. Um, if then there was the meteor strike that took out the dinosaurs, and I think you have to understand catastrophism in that light. That God, who I believe is definitely sovereign over history, allows catastrophes. In fact, in many places in the text, God initiates catastrophes. The destruction of the city of the plains, Sodom and Gomorrah, is a catastrophe instrumented by God. The destruction of the temple is a catastrophe instrumented by God. I mean, one of the most radical things is to say that the Babylonians who destroy the temple are God's workers. Um, God's warning to Israel that if she doesn't keep the covenant, they'll be vomited out of the land. You can read that in sort of an environmental nuance. So I think it's amazing that we did not have a full-fledged nuclear exchange during the Cold War. Still possible today, still might happen. Nuclear weapons are still very much around, but didn't happen. Praise God. I mean that very sincerely. So God's silence is a funny thing, because what we mean when we say that is usually, Frederick Buechner has a wonderful little story where God rearranges the stars in the sky and they say, I exist, signed God. And he says, when that first happens, everybody goes to church for the next few months. And then church attendance gradually goes down and goes back to where it was before. And I think Buechner's right. The heavens declare the glories of God. Day after day, they pour forth speech. It's in the Psalms. So God is speaking all the time. And he speaks in many different ways. He speaks through his creation and he speaks through his word. That's, basic Christian Reformed catechism. What was God saying during the Second World War? That's a complex thing. To whom? Did the Second World War bless the world? In some ways, but oh, what a price. So, yeah. And I think when John says God was silent, I think he's sort of countering some rather shallow Christian yammering that can be sort of self-serving. Motor. What is the importance of music and song to meaning and faith? Oof. Can fiddling be a right response to the end times worry? Yeah. Music and song are a gift from God, and they're a mystery in many ways. And what's amazing is that, it's Protestantism and music is deeply connected. If you look at the history of, let's say, English hymnody, this huge outpouring of hymns in the modern period in England, where catechesis went through hymns. So often, at Living Stones, we don't currently have a musician, so we're doing all of our singing a cappella, which has really been a good experience. I've really enjoyed it. And I think about, so every now and then I'll, if haven't had been for Rick and I will be in Rick's little office before church on Sunday. And Rick for a while was always looking at other churches and how they were broadcasting. And there's the St. Elijah over in middle America somewhere. I think it's Oklahoma City or something. I mean, they live stream like all the time, and which is an interesting thing. And I watch them go through the liturgy, and of course, with all the Orthodox around us, we hear, "Oh, the liturgy, the liturgy, the liturgy." And Father Josiah talked about his brother. I mean, they both grew up Presbyterian, and his brother goes to an Orthodox church, and God is there. And so he, as quick as he can, joins the Orthodox church because he heard the divine liturgy. So again, I say, well, praise God. I'm happy for you. I'm not going to get all tribal that, oh no, the Presbyterians lost 1-2, in fact. I'm not going to play that game. But song is for Protestant churches. That is their liturgy. Some of the music is good, some of the music isn't. C.S. Lewis was pretty clear about that. God works through it. It's the psychotechnology of Protestantism in many ways. Mark Engel. Men wanting solid theology, women wanting good relations. Yeah, that's good. That's good. David Walker with a quote. His diminishing flock rarely asked him about scientific matters anymore. Few of them dare to ask themselves. I don't know where this is from, though. Oh, okay. Nick Land. He long ago dropped out of such classes to the secret relief of his friends. For a while, they insisted he had other gifts, ineffable ones, and with the blindness of mothers praising the aging infants' good nature, which they had calmed down a lot. Nick Land, one of my favorite quotes talking about God. To me, we have to put away the male-female fight. I'll make myself small here. We have to put away the male-female fight and plugged our ears and yell to drown out the noise. Do you think there's a way out of this through it? To elaborate a little, Peugeot seems to get to the answer, but the more he puts out, the more I think there is something deeply missing in his work. I'm not sure how to put it. Hey, there she is. There's the queen of the firsties, Vixen Dixon. Hi, I am a unique individual. Thank you. Yeah, I think you make a good point, David. We're commanded to love our neighbors. Our sisters are our neighbors. Sometimes they're our wives and daughters and our mothers and our grandmothers. So I've been married 35 years. Women are just different. They just are. God bless the differences. I bump into this all the time. There are more women in my church than men. I deal with women all the time. They're just different. Love them. Yeah. I think spelling struggles run in the family. How many more we got? Oh my goodness. Oh, look at them all. No more. I'm never going to be able to get through all these. I got a half hour. Oh boy. Oh, I was doing so well. I started off so strong. Part of the thing is you guys are answering the questions here in the comments. That's a problem. I'm going to skip a few that seem to be responses to other things. You can go to the link and read them yourself. What's your favorite color? Don't have one. I don't like having favorite things. My favorite color is the color I'm wearing now. So I guess for today, my favorite color is blue. Might be different tomorrow. I got, well, this one I didn't get from Land's End, but I got a bunch of these. I'm really a person of ruts. I better put myself in the big screen. I'm really a person of ruts. And so I got some shirts from Land's End that I liked. And so, I got this shirt from Amazon, which it's a good shirt. I like it too, but I like it less. And I go back to the Land's End and the shirts are gone. It's like Doggone it. And so could still get these on Amazon. So I have a lot of those those plaid shirts that I got at Costco a few years ago. I like buying shirts at Costco, but Costco shirts don't always fit real well because I tend to be tall and slender. So finding clothes is hard when you're my size. But the patterns do funny things on the camera. So then Rick says, "You need solid colors, Paul." So I listen to Rick. I haven't seen Rick check in on. Rick must be busy today. I know, Jacob. I'm such a rabble-rouser. Okay. Of all the speakers of the conference, oddly, you were the one who disturbed me the most. I'm sorry, Joseph. Is the Christological solution, physical suffering and self-martyrdom, the only solution you see? No. I answered that in that one question, but I wanted to make sure that tone got out there because I also believe in defending. And what exactly is the hill you're willing to die on? Well, I think as a servant of Jesus, you're supposed to be with him. And so you try to stay with him even when it's hard, even when his disciples can't stay awake, even when his disciples run. So we had the anointing question before. What if one of Jesus' disciples had been crucified with him? How would that have changed the story? Why is it that both Peter and Judas betray him, but in different ways, and Peter is restored and Judas is condemned? And what does that condemnation mean? These are hard questions. Or could there be another biblical solution to the long-term problem? For instance, hard-earned wisdom that redeems previous suffering? Absolutely. Home and family built on covenant responsibility? Absolutely. Not the call to conquering through death or stealing the culture, but to build a way in the wilderness and clear it of stumbling blocks leading to the city of refuge for the oppressed. That is a model of righteousness. Absolutely. I think those are good too. I don't think these things are necessarily exclusive. The same Jesus that clears the court of the Gentiles because he wants his Father's house to be a house of prayer is the same Jesus that is crucified. The same Jesus that is arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane is the same Jesus that ducked arrest a number of times beforehand. The earth has a way of affording a variety of instantiations, but all of us tend to have priorities and callings. So yeah. But there's something in Christianity about and Paul gets at this in the early chapters to 1 Corinthians. It starts with Christ crucified. It starts with this self-donation. Sometimes the self-donation might mean a cross. Sometimes the self-donation might mean a life of service. I think self-donation stands at the heart of it. I think self-donation stands at the kind of conviction and disciplined living. So, yeah. What should I name this frog? Personally, I lean toward Leo Tolstoy, why don't you? I think you should name it Jacob. I think you should name it Jacob. I think Jacob would be an excellent name for your toad. I don't know. Do we know any Jacobs in this world? It seems that most advice about being a married Christian presupposes both spouses were Christian before their marriage, or at least one spouse was Christian before marriage. However, just as in the apostolic age, there now is increasing the situation where neither spouse was Christian before marriage, but one finds faith and transforms, also alters the marriage irrevocably. My interest is spurred primarily because I find myself in this situation and weighs heavy as I find a distinct dearth of advice how to go forward. You know, Mark, it's not only people coming into the church after they're married, it's couples where one of the members leaves the faith after they're married. In other words, they were married in the church and they both started as disciples of Jesus and one left. In there is, the Apostle Paul addresses this in 1 Corinthians as well, and addresses it pretty directly. And his advice to people is, don't, in your conversion, don't use it as an excuse to start breaking bonds that were there when you were saved. And so he says to slaves, you can be a Christian slave. Now, if you're offered an opportunity for your freedom, by all means, take it. But, and he talks about, let's say, betrothed virgins to someone who becomes a Christian. Because you become a Christian, you don't have to undo the betrothal. There has been a tradition in some churches where, so the permissibility of divorce is obviously been a large conversation within Christianity. And some traditions of Christianity has said that divorce is permissible if, let's say, your spouse isn't a Christian. I don't necessarily advise it. It's also the case that Paul notes that hopefully if you're living the Christian life, that in one way or another, your Christianity will have a redemptive influence on your spouse. So you're right. It's not a lot. Well, I don't know that not a lot is said of it, because it's been a reality. I've had many people in my church that became Christians and their spouses didn't convert. I continue to have many. We bear witness to Christ within our marriages, or we try to. And it's one of the most challenging places to be a witness, because it's so up close. It's a good topic. What should have happened at the recent Chino conference, I think it was an overwhelming success. I'm hard pressed to imagine ways that it could have been bettered. It was really good. It was really good. I think a lot of what should have happened. And now I'm releasing the stuff that happened on stage and was recorded. But boy, a lot of the really good stuff happened at the campfire, and the hot tub, at the meals, on the bus. It was amazing. It was one of the best conferences I've ever been to. It was really good. If the first will be last, then the last will be first, and everything glorifies God from the viewpoint of eternity, or at least Romans 9:21-23, including hell, it is possible to do the work that glorifies God more than other work. And if so, how would you tell if God is finite and you are finite? If all things must necessarily glorify God, is it possible to not glorify God? Since we're admonished to glorify God, that certainly holds out the fact that there's stuff that isn't God glorifying, and I don't think that's hard to put forward. I think we have to be careful of trying to employ language towards ends that pretty clearly language isn't able to express. And we run into this often. So talk to someone whose their path to Christ came through, let's say, a divorce or abuse or alcoholism or something like this. And they say, boy, I wouldn't wish being an addict on anybody, but if not for the addiction, I never would have had the relationship with Christ I have now. So does addiction glorify God? I think it's just a problem of language. God, one of the real powerful messages of the gospel is that God turns rebellion into glory. So that doesn't make rebellion good. It just makes glory better. I may not make the live stream, but we'll probably watch the video on demand. How do you feel about the spiritual dynamics of the land where you are, and how does that affect your teaching and preaching compared to other Reformed churches? Well, a lot of it depends on Sacramento, south part of Sacramento, America. I mean, a lot depends on the exact locality. And even in, let's say, Northern California or Sacramento, there are definitely spirits here that are distinct from other cities. Cities have their principalities. Cities have their spiritual qualities, and nested within them are many, many more, all the way down to a neighborhood, all the way down to an address, all the way localized in a zip code. I preach to, well, it's weird now because I do have a mind. And I struggle this with preaching. To what degree is my preaching for the people in the room, and to what degree is it on the internet, when the numbers on the internet are so much larger than the numbers in the room? So you try to speak to both groups. And the truth is, when you have a small church, you have a sense of the spiritual dynamic of every single person in those seats, to the degree that you can sort of ascertain them. So it's a really hard question, but I do think about it. Jeremiah was a bullfrog. No, Jeremiah was a bullfrog. This is a toad. Jacob the toad. What do you think of churches that live stream their services online? I do. I think they're okay. It's a real question, though. For my church, obviously there are some people that watch it because of the channel. Some people that watch it should be here, and it's sort of inviting their laziness. We've had that problem with some members. Other people, I've got a lot of older people, and sometimes they can't make it to church. They got real health issues, and so the live stream, it's a blessing. So, like so many things, it's all over the place. Oh yeah, I didn't do a Tim Keller sermon yet. I should talk about Tim. How do you feel about spending a period of time putting aside the theological and theoretical frameworks that you developed? Putting aside, I know that these are not things that anyone completely removes from themselves overnight, and I'm not suggesting you do it. I'm just wondering how you feel after so many years of building an increasingly complex of interwoven narratives. Your particular Christian theology, Vervaeke stuff, all the Peterson Peugeot ideas, various different perspectives from the Randos conversations, to practice putting them aside in an attempt to encounter really afresh, including the sensation and experience of having thoughts related to those conceptual frameworks rushing in to try to draw your attention away. I think part of this is the difference between watching me on your little boxes and how I live my life. Most of my life is not what you see on YouTube, even though I put a lot on YouTube. There's a lot of my life that's doing really mundane things, spent with people that have absolutely zero interest, and they would have no understanding of what I'm talking about here in this little box. So this by no means sort of engulfs my life. It's in some ways, I'm a very selfish YouTuber. You all are my unpaid therapists. You're my unpaid theoretical therapists. I come to you when I have strange ideas and I need to work them out. And y'all let me know what you think. I've got my therapist has the most amazing consciousness congress you would ever believe. So that's kind of where this fits in for me. Is despair a sin? Can be. Oh, Nechama, sneaky, using the super chat to get her question in. Any reflections on that wooden bowl dream prophecy at Prost and Post-Chino? Also naturally curious on Peugeot's thoughts there. Jonathan, I don't know if Jonathan's ever heard that video or Jonathan knows anything about that dream. I should go back and just clip out that dream because, I mean, memory, as we talked about at the conference, is a very tricky thing. And so I probably should have written it down right after the woman told me about it. I hope God uses me to shed his light around the world. Is there darkness coming? There's a lot of darkness here. It'd be interesting to hear what Jonathan thought about the dream too. I think Jonathan would just kind of laugh, and because I think the interpretations are fairly obvious. It's not an obscure dream, but and thinking about it's good too. Chino was a point in time. It was a continuation of Thunder Bay. But there's been a lot of events happening, and I want there to be more. I don't know what God's using with me. I think about these videos go out into the world and people watch them. And that's the strangest part of it, is that stuff comes back through. Grim says it's already been clipped out. All right, I'll have to see what I can do to get that. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. So, yeah. We'll see what God does with me. Is despair a sin? Is it more helpful to think of despair as a sin rather than a chemical imbalance or a fault of society or family? Despair, like anger, if you're talking about despair as an emotion, emotions aren't sins, they're signals, okay? And what you do with that, sin is something you do. Sins in that sense. So just like, is anger a sin? No. In your anger, do not sin. In your despair, do not sin. You should arrange your life so it's not despair prone. I'll say it that way. I'm running out of time. Got to keep going. Was Timothy Keller more of a aughts Peugeot Vervaeke Jordan Peterson or something else entirely? Or maybe he was the aughts PVK. When I first came upon Jordan Peterson I was researching on Reddit, looking at comment sections. Tim Keller's name came up a number of times, and I noted that people who had been watching Tim Keller had started watching Jordan Peterson. I don't think that's a surprise. Tim Keller, so people look at the Ortho Bros as a male movement, but before there were Ortho Bros, there was the Young, Restless, and Reformed movement, which sort of comes out of the emergent movement, which is a reaction to the seeker movement. And Keller was sort of a bridge person because he had read all the seeker stuff, but he was a conservative Reformed pastor with a lot of, and he and Piper and a lot of those guiding lights basically repristinated a lot of Puritan stuff. And so yeah, it was before Peterson, but the aughts were a different age, and Keller had a much smaller audience, and for the most part, the majority of Keller's audience was Christian, although he was able to sort of reach out beyond into sort of the blue state world through. Keller, the thing that Keller could do was what a lot of evangelicals wish they could do, but couldn't really do well. If you go look on YouTube, you can find Tim Keller talking at Google. Think about that. Tim Keller was able to preach a conservative, reformed gospel in places where that was sort of unthinkable. Now, people will critique Keller or criticize Keller because they'll say, well, he pulled some of his punches. Yeah. Almost any crossover person will be pulling punches in one way or another. Unless the space is the likes of which, sort of like this little corner in some ways, where punch pulling isn't valued. And part of I get criticism for spending time with people who say that Protestantism is a terrible idolatry. Can't imagine who around here. What did I say? What did I say? Why did I say that toad should be named Jacob? Anselman. I get criticized for pulling punches. I'm sure you do, Jacob. Everybody's fringe has a fringe. Yeah, dire. So Peterson came about in a different age. Peterson came about at the same time as the rise of Trump. There's something to that. It was a different age. So yeah, I do have to make a video about Tim Keller. Do you believe in the theory of evolution? I'll answer the same way I answered Adam Friend did. I believe God used process. He continues to use process. There's something to the fact that, there's a lot of shared DNA between different species, apparently, but how do I know? Do I know any of this? All this stuff is so third hand for me. So I basically decide I'm not going to fight people on it on either side. I watch, I listen sometimes to some of that debate, and I'm intrigued by it. I don't know what kind of grasp we have on so many things, much less this. So God uses process. That doesn't seem hard to see. Relationship between repentance and hope. I think you repent in hope. You repent in hope that your sins can be left behind and that life can be restored. As someone operating on the fringe, have you found yourself connecting with the dog-headed saint carrying the cross across the river? There he is. Yeah, that the dog-headed saint gets brought up a lot in this little corner, and yeah, I get that. I guess there is a degree to which I can sort of relate to that. I'm kind of a third culture person by virtue of where and when I was born and to whom I was born and my parents' work. I was part of the CRC. I went to the Christian school. I know its language, but I also went to Northside and I did overseas missions, and I always feel myself just not quite in the center. And that's okay, and happily so. Will the potential for AGI soft tyranny bring about a post-meta modern and usher a hyper-literalism via the regurgitation of turning everything into language? How do we walk through this? What do we do? Do we really need savings throws? I don't know. Does savings throws hurt? remember, their savings throws against mind control. The AGI is a number one of those things I want to make a video about. I just haven't had a lot of time to make videos. I don't really know that we haven't even figured out what on earth Twitter is doing to us. So Thomas Flight had that video about modern, postmodern, and metamodernism. He also had a video about everything everywhere, which I watched yesterday, and I really liked it because he talked about, and he contacted me over Twitter, which was really cool. He says, "I've watched some of your videos." Oh, that's great. It's fun when that happens. So we don't have any idea one of my favorite parts of Peterson's classroom lectures is when he answers the question, what is a car? What was the cotton gin? What was the plow? What is electricity? All of these things rewrite the world and rewrite us in ways we can't sort of imagine. Meta-modern is sort of everybody's looking for the language to figure out, because post-modernity, it's not a way forward. It's a dead end. It's a death. I think more and more people are figuring that out. Modernity is ending. Okay. How do we talk about what's coming forward? It's hard. Beyond the jargon. Yeah. Yeah. All of my Z's. That's right. Electricity. Oh. Okay. I'm distracted by the comments. So, Chad, the righteous will live by faith. We move forward. We move forward in faith. I don't know how you would live in this world. Let me say it another way. My belief in the sovereignty of God gives me much encouragement in this world. Hopefully not in sort of the cheap way that John is sort of calling out. Oh my goodness, I have all of these. Oh, okay. Grim Grizz. Got a high school atheist softball for you today, Paul. If each person is a new immortal soul and some of them end up spending eternity in hell, isn't God creating and sending millions to eternal damnation by Jesus Christ not coming back already? My answer to the question of hell is always God knows. Yeah, I already answered this one. God does speak. I agree. I think in the end, part of the statement that God is good means that when is even a difficult word to use in this context. When this dispensation is finally wrapped up and put on the shelf, it can and will be said that God did right by us. And I think right by all of us. How he does this, I don't know. I'll say it that way. Should we join one of the true churches just to be on the safe side? Absolutely. You go right ahead and join that true. Don't join a false church. Join the true church. I'll let you decide which one that is. I wonder if we don't give enough credit to the mode of communication in each movement, printing, press, TV, internet. All these things seem to happen right before the big movements, Protestantism, post-modernity, of evangelicalism, meta-modernity, whatever this little corner turns into. I think our understanding of information through perceived mediums has an immense effect on how to receive the world. I don't know if I'm posting this in the right place for you to read it. Yes, you are posting it. And yeah, I agree 100%. I agree 100%. I think I think it had, earlier in the video, I talked about how we all have to sort of construct a worldview. And we do that. Part of what these technologies, the printing press, the written word, the spoken word, the recorded spoken word, the diversity of the internet, what of that, all that monkeys with our worldview. And so, yeah, these are the big movements. Topher, the speaker fixing man. How does the idea of Christendom overlay the emerging global structures between the West, Russia, and China? Oof. Jordan sees the development of the human individual rights that were associated with the West as a flower of the Christian tree. It's super interesting watching his thought develop through the Exodus series. That's super interesting. If you listen to a summary in episode 17, it's like, yeah, this experience of the Exodus seminar really molded him, which is what you want from an experience. Russia seems to be trying to cast the West as lost, decadent, and depraved, and themselves as the true torchbearers. Yet they ally themselves with arguably the entity that is arguably the most antagonistic to all the Abrahamic religions, or the CCP. Progressivism and arguably atheism as Christian heritage would see more comfortable bedfellows, wouldn't they? Oh, absolutely. The irony, so of course, when the Ukraine war started, there was all of this attention paid to Putin's, spiritual father. And, there may be some higher ideas back there, but the way Putin seems to be going about things, it's hard not to see him as not a lot more than a warlord or a tyrant. To what degree is this resistance to certain aspects of Western progressivism, just to what degree is that actually what's going on there? Or is Putin, I mean, you can understand why he started the war. The popularity of, what a lot of Jordan Peterson points to in the West in terms of what it does. There's a reason people want to get to the West and bring it back and make their home more like the West. The individual liberties, the wealth, the affluence, the opportunity. Just in the US a week or so ago, there was all this panic over everyone trying to get into the country. I don't blame them. My ancestors wanted to get to this country. I'm glad they did, for my sake. The United States is an amazing place to live. And some of the ironies is that, that it's hard to bring together in a coherent picture a lot of the discordant voices. But so, yeah, I can understand why the continued influence of the West on Ukraine increasingly became for Russia an existential threat. The irony, of course, in that attacking Ukraine, Putin managed to accelerate his fears in that suddenly Germany increases its military spending. Finland and Sweden want to join NATO. Poland is increasingly becoming a significant military power. And on top of that, Russia's losing the war. It appears. I don't know. So, and then of course, but then again, during the Second World War, Roosevelt and Churchill ally with Stalin. And Stalin was a critically important ally in both the European theater and the Pacific theater. But yeah, to the degree that Putin is more than just kind of a tyrant, I don't know. You've got what was interesting about the Exodus seminar is that it became a conversation about a godly nation and godly government, which is interesting. It shouldn't be surprised given that it's on Daily Wire Plus. Spiritual locality is important. But yeah, I think there needs to be rivals, Christian rivals to the West. I think we will probably see that arise out of Africa and Asia. We don't know what's happening in China long term. There's speculation that Christianity will continue to grow in China, and China could become in the next century a majority Christian country. How would that change the world? The flourishing of Orthodoxy in America would lead us to say that there are treasures and riches preserved in the Orthodox tradition that Western Christianity could benefit from. That seems true to me. What's interesting is going to be the degree to which the emigration of the church from the East to America can handle its own baggage. The baggage of the Western church is all around us. So, yeah, it's an interesting world, but is there anything to Putin beyond being? I mean, the fact is, the most common form of government in world history is the strong man. Makes sense. One of the remarkable things in world history is that in the modern period, Western Christian democracies, and I don't think, well, I was going to say Protestantism and democracy, they're deeply intertwined. I think part of why the English democratic system has been so powerful is the Church of England, for all of its strangeness and weakness in some ways today, did manage to produce some things that were quite remarkable. So, yeah. Anyway, it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. Part of what the Iron Curtain, as Churchill called it, kept two sides separate. And now that, since the end of the Cold War, now that the East has been opened up, we're finding all kinds of things. And I think it's going to be good. Well, I have used all the time, so I'm not going to bring anybody into the channel. So you had a lot of questions this week. I have a 1:00 lunch appointment, and I got to get my sermon done, and my sermon's still kind of a mess. So anyway, thank you all for joining. And Matt, I haven't forgotten your idea, and I like your idea, so we'll do it at some point. And so thank you for your time and attention.